If you've ever gone on a hike or walked a creek or riverbed in northern Ohio, chances are you've stepped over an ancient stone artifact. In this video, we're going to discuss some of the most common that you can still find all over the region. But before we begin, regarding the efficacy of disturbing ancient Native American burial sites, I'd like to establish that I am of the firm belief that this is something that we should not be doing. I reckon it akin to someone digging up grandma or grandpa hoping to find an old valuable Rolex or something. Grave robbing is bad. Where do I find the courage? Using just a little bit of logic regarding human history and spirituality, one can easily spot burial mounds and sacred places. It doesn't take a PhD and a grant from the super wealthy to identify something that cultures have done all across the world. In England, they are called barrows. In Scotland, Ireland, and the Wales, they refer to them as cairns. Generally speaking, this worldwide phenomena of interring the dead within a mound of earth and stones is known as a tumulus. There are plenty of non-burial related sites and artifacts to be discovered, and I don't think we need to be grave robbing to understand the history of our land. I'll save my suspicions about the industrialists of Ohio using academia as cover to exploit burial mounds of the so-called glacial cave culture for a different video. Anyway, let's start with a publication from 1966 titled Ohio Archaeologist, Volume 16, featuring stone tools published by the Archaeological Society of Ohio. Most of us are aware of the stereotypical arrowhead and their association with American Aboriginals. These are at the Bedford Historical Society, not on display but tucked away on the top floor of the building in storage along with the rest of their local Native American artifacts. But what I find much more interesting are the things we don't fully understand. Ground stone tools. The book begins with, next to flint implements, ground or polished stone tools are the most abundant of all prehistoric Indian artifacts. Even though early man used flint to the near exclusion of all other stone for his tools, the simple hammer stone was a necessity for working flint, and may have been man's first tool. Since really any rock can be used as a hammer, this one is difficult for me to identify out of context, so let's move on. Next is the cupstone, probably one of the least understood artifacts. This publication states that they are one of the earliest forms of ground stone tools, and that it has been suggested that the cups were used to hold nuts for cracking. I'm not at all satisfied with this explanation. I prefer Charles Whittlesey's theory in his 1871 publication called Ancient Earth Forts of the Cuyahoga Valley, in which he wrote, quote, "They are evidently formed by revolutions, for they are smooth and the section is a true circle. They are so numerous that they must have been in general use for domestic purposes." After pointing out that the native people at the time didn't know how to use them or what their purpose was, he goes on to state, "In the Ohio mounds and on the surface, there is found flat circular stones with a hole in the center, such as are found in England, and in the Swiss lake dwellings, where they are called spindle whorls. The northern Indians were dressed in skins when they were first encountered by the whites, and did not know the use of cloth," thus implying that the spindle or cup stones were used in the manufacturing of cloth. The book continues with a few more easily identified objects, like the grooved hammerstone and the grooved axe, but being much more identifiable, they are quite rare to come across as having been scooped up by collectors for decades. Also is the concretion container, frequently used as a paint cup, but these are so incredibly abundant in northern Ohio, it would be completely impossible to determine their use by natives, lacking context. Next are pestles. These are very abundant in heavily forested areas and fit easily between 2 fingers and the thumb. It would make sense that these were used for cracking or grinding small nuts. A much larger version would be the metate, or mealing stone. These would have been used to process grains or seeds. When it comes to the ades and celts, these things are prolific in northern Ohio. While some can be diagnostic of being of Hopewell or Adena in origin, their intended purpose remains debatable. Usually said to have been used for woodworking or hoeing, the truth is that no one is entirely certain as to their purpose, as they were also unknown to the Native Americans of the 16th and 17th centuries. Therefore, many celts and ade-styled ground stone tools have been ignored. The best explanation I have come across on how to identify a celt came from the Mississippi Valley Archeology Center at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, whose full video I'll link below.
Here we have a collection of celts and axes and a little axe preform and something that has been worked a little bit more lightly, and then a natural stone. So what do archaeologists look for when we're looking at things to see what is actually an axe or a celt and what was just a natural stone? Well, this first celt here gives us a good clue. It's a very polished surface at the end. This is where it was cutting into the tree and it got polished through use. So there's a high sheen on here. So it's actually polished smooth on both surfaces. This edge here is a little bit shallower, so it probably reflects how far they were digging into the wood on this surface. And then in the middle, it was shaped by taking one stone and pecking it into the surface, so this surface is very rough. So we've got a very distinct difference. On the side, it was probably hafted, so the surface here is very polished again, and on the back, again, a rough pecked surface that hasn't yet been polished from use as it is on the end. So if I run my finger from one end to the other, I get a very different experience across the way. Lots of differences because it's reflecting use over here and manufacture over here.
We found the most common of the celts in and around the Cuyahoga Valley to be those similar to those pictured in the book Ethnological Researches Respecting the Red Man of America, and usually varying in color between red, gray, or black. However, there are numerous different shapes and sizes for all these mysterious artifacts. If you see a strange rock, trust your intuition. While nature can make all kinds of strange shapes, it doesn't manufacture the same strange shapes over and over again. Also, be leery of seeking authentication from archaeologists or museums. In 1971, a cache of Native American game pieces was found during the excavation for the addition to a home in Walton Hills. Because they weren't removed from the ground by an archaeologist, they were rejected by the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. Here's a few more examples from our collection. Now let's talk about some of the most problematic stuff we've come across. You've probably heard or even seen of examples of what's called a birdstone, attributed to the glacial cave culture, which predated the Adena. These objects can often be found on trails or anywhere gravel has been put down, because we dig up these glacial mounds all the time to use for fill. Usually described as an ornament or some type of superstitious trinket, it was once known that these were in fact both a decorative object and one with a functional purpose, as an atlatl spur. For those of you who aren't already familiar with the atlatl, it was the primary weapon of antiquity, and essentially a tool to throw a spear. The spur was attached to the end to hold the dart. Candace Ralston and Richard Fitzgerald from the California Department of Parks and Recreation identified the unkeeled and keeled Type 1 atlatl spur made from stone as dating as far back as 8,000 years ago. They also wrote that the spurs have been misidentified in archaeological literature as snakehead effigies or fetishes for ceremonial purposes. It's funny how anything we don't understand gets labeled ceremonial. Next is a real head scratcher, the stone oil lamp. Known to the Inuit of the Arctic as the quillick, a small bit of animal fat was placed on the stone and mashed. Then a cord of dried moss was placed around the edge and lit. It's thought perhaps that some of the glacial cave culture might have traveled north around 1000 BC towards the beginning of the Adena culture, and these lamps have been found in Paleo-Eskimo sites dating back as far as 3,000 years ago. However, I've found zero acknowledgement or documented findings of these stone oil lamps in Ohio, but they are plentiful. It should be noted that several harpoons made from antlers have been found in cane mounds in northern Ohio, so obviously something beyond trading valued items for ceremonial purposes is going on. I've saved the best for last. Animal shapes. I can't say that they're all that common, but they're out there. I showed this one to a local hunter, a real old-timer, and he said, "That's a beaver!" This one? I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments section. I do think that it's worth noting that the giant beaver, otherwise called the Castoroides, was first discovered in Ohio. Also, one was found with the Paleo-Indian artifacts in the Sheridan Cave in Wyandotte County.